around 8 or 9 years old, this experience with the car and having the N-word thrown at you. One thing that's interesting about the way you told that story is that, so you're 8 or 9, but the N-word, you're not familiar with that word and its
Well,
history.
you have to understand, we're talking about 67, 68. So I lived in a segregated neighborhood. Um, there was one, maybe two, like one white lady that for whatever reason, older lady didn't move. I cut her yard. It didn't really click with me that she was different. It was just Miss Pearl, and so all my friends were black. The school I went to was all black. I had a white teacher in the fourth grade that was kind of, a rebellious, straight out of college. This was like her first teaching job and she was going to make a difference, that kind of thing. And otherwise, I didn't go to school with white people until I was in the seventh grade. Okay. So I can remember in retrospect, I didn't think of it as Jim Crow when I was in it, right? Because I didn't know anything any different. So
I kind of find it interesting, Marlon, that you didn't have a conversation with your parents about it, because that is really how I ended up at a young age understanding at least about the history of racism and the civil rights movement. I already knew that before I went into kindergarten, just
well, see,
through
it was
education.
happening right when
Right.
I was
That's
coming
right.
along.
That's right.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the name Daisy Bates. She's from Arkansas. She is the woman that basically sort of shepherded the Little Rock Nine. I mean, I used to go by her house every other, on my way to school.
Crazy.
She was just Miss Bates. I mean, I didn't know she was like a celebrity or something, And so, and I'll tell you, it was different. First of all, we did not refer to each other as black. We were Negroes. I mean, calling somebody black, you're talking about fisticuffs, man.
Yep, you're ready to fight.
Escalate. It was like, that was like the N-word for us. Okay.
Now it's reverse, right?
If I know. It's just, these things evolve, but yeah, my parents marched during the movement, but they weren't, my dad almost converted to Islam, for whatever reason, did not. And we talked, we had these conversations, but it just was a different kind of a discussion. And the white people that I did come into contact with were sort of on our team. They were involved, in some adjacent way to civil rights. So, I was just a little kid trying to, figure out how to go outside and play. I wasn't even thinking about, the fact that I was in this segregated Jim Crow situation.
Yeah, and why would you, right? Like as a child. So so you have this situation. Oh yeah, one other thing I wanted to comment on. I really like that you talked about, experiencing the consequences of racism unawares. Because a lot of people don't really understand that not every negative consequence of racism is something you can easily perceive. But it doesn't mean that the impacts are not significant on one's life. And so I always like when people bring up, upon reflection, I realize X, Y, and Z, because it gets people to understand that, like, yeah, maybe you thought you were just fine and everything was just fine at the time. But,
I mean, as far as I was concerned, I had a great little life going. Now, I will tell you, and the reason I mentioned Pine Bluff, Little Rock's the capital. Pine Bluff at the time was the second largest city in the state. I don't think it is anymore. But it's much more of a rural, a lot of farming, a lot of tobacco, this sort of thing. And my parents moved there. They each were managers at what's now Dillard's department stores. So she was a manager of the women's department, dad's a manager of the men. So that was like a big job back then, to be in charge of
Oh,
something.
heck yeah.
And so that is really when the racism became noticeable, because you're talking about, I guess, about 1970, 71. So there was forced integration in Arkansas, especially Little Rock schools. And, all of the schools were forced to integrate. So a lot of the white schools closed, and the black schools, and they just sort of merged them together and my high school was this one gigantic high school that was sort of a conglomeration of several neighborhood schools that had just been pushed together. And that's when the racism was much more obvious, because, so for example, I would hear guys, and we first moved there, and we had been living there 2 or 3 years, and people still referred to me as that new boy, so we there was the White Boys Club, and I thought it was named after somebody whose name was white. No, it was a White Boys Club and a Black Boys Club. They're getting United Way money now, mind you. And the boys club was segregated. So my dad had an idea that he was gonna, file a lawsuit. And to do that, of course, you got to show that you've been harmed. So one day he rounds me and a couple of my younger brothers up, and I remember him saying, "I want you to pay attention what's getting ready to happen." And we're like, okay. And so we go to this boys club, and it's really nice. We walk in, they got all the stuff, the ping pong and guys shooting pool and doing all this stuff. And they're all white kids that we went to school with. And when we walked in, everything stopped. Everything. And I'll never forget, there was a white kid that was, junior high or maybe high school. Not a grown person. And apparently he was, behind the desk in charge. And he walks up to my dad, who's almost 6'6", and says, "You can't come in here." And we're like, "What?" Yeah, to my dad. And my dad said, "I want a membership." And the guy spoke to him like a grown person would speak, like we would talk. But this is like a child. But that lets you know the mindset of how he viewed my father.
Oh, yeah.
And we left, but we were stunned that we couldn't join. We didn't know what to expect. And we could not join that boys club. So he started the beginnings of a lawsuit. And that's when the calls started coming, the phone, the hangups, and, all that kind of thing. And my dad traveled. He would be gone. He's a salesman, and he traveled, and he would be gone a week, maybe two at a time. And he was like, "You know what? I can't risk not being here." And we live in a wooden house, and so we didn't pursue it. And I think a few years later, a black guy in the military, because at the time there was a military facility that actually created nerve gas just right outside of. It was a big employer in Pine Bluff, and so this guy ended up filing a lawsuit, and so it works its way through the court system, and essentially the upshot was the court said, well, basically, you can be segregated or you can take this United Way money, but you can't do both. And the city, they decided, well, we won't take the money.
That's right.
And the city raised the money to keep that place segregated. And they had, you've seen these fundraising drives where they have the thermometer thing, the big sign, and they show how much money they've raised. Yeah. In the middle of town. And we're like, damn, these folks really don't want us around. And so, that was when I think it clicked for me. And I think that's when I got a little bit more, I wouldn't say militant, but probably pushing it quite a bit more than, I made a lot of people uncomfortable when I was in high school. I
Wow.
was much better at that than I was at actual school.
Listen, that was part of school, okay? That was part of your education and theirs, I'm sure. So, wow. I love that story you just told. And another thing that I really like about it is there's this narrative out there in 2025, Marlon, where people try to say that, oh, it was so long ago, and, racism is a thing of the past, and, oh, we need to go back to where everyone got along racially, like in the 70s and 80s, when this story that you're telling, occurred. And it's, my dad, he grew up in Boynton Beach, Florida, and they had Jim Crow down there, separate swimming pools, separate water fountains, the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And when he could not swim in his neighborhood swimming pool. And then when they integrated it, they just shut it down,
Oh, yeah.
Just like many other places did,
Mm-hmm.
So your story resonates with me there because it's also what my dad experienced. Is like, we'd rather burn it down than have you be there, have you take part. And I think that we're seeing the exact same thing here in 2025, right? Like, I think that people need to start coming to terms with the fact that people will hold on for dear life to white supremacy, even on their deathbed. Better not be a black doctor, the only doctor on call who can save your life if you are holding on to that, because you will die, and they'll die, shouting racial epithets. Like, that is still the world that we live in today. And, so I just wanted to bring that up because I don't want people to assume that your story is something that is so far removed from our present experience, because that is absolutely not the case. Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support, and see you next time.